The night I understood what kind of marriage I was in, I was sitting at the edge of the bed in the dark. My hands were pressed flat against my thighs. He came in from the barn, Chan, and looked at me the way a man looks when the evening already has a shape he has decided. I told him quietly, without lifting my eyes, that my time had come, that I was experiencing a routine monthly occurrence, something no woman chooses and no woman stops. I asked for a few nights of rest, not demanded. Asked. What happened next was not a raised hand. It was not a shout. It was not anything the outside world would have looked at and called cruelty. It was a silence that filled the room like cold water rising. Then he said, "A wife's duty does not bleed." He turned his back to me. I sat in that dark bedroom for a long time, understanding that something had just been decided about my body that I had not been allowed to vote on, and that this was not going to be the last time. I was right. It was not the last time. It was only the beginning of a 4-year education in what it means to live inside a system that has already determined your body is not entirely your own. This channel is where I say out loud the things that were never supposed to leave those farmhouses. If you are new here, stay, because what I am about to tell you is the truth. Not the softened version, not the version that spares anyone's feelings. The truth about what Amish husbands are taught, what Amish wives absorb without being told directly, and what happens to a woman who tries to say no. I grew up old order in a small Indiana district close enough to the Ohio border that we traded at market with those communities, but far enough that our bishop answered to no one but himself, which meant the rules that shaped our lives were his rules, his interpretations, his silences, and his silences were enormous. I married at 19. He was 24. He was considered a good match, steady, faithful in attendance, known for his work ethic. I went into that marriage the way every girl in my community went in, without a real understanding of what I was agreeing to. We are not given that understanding. That is not an accident. The Ordnung, and if you have heard of the Amish, you have heard that word, is the code. The unwritten law that governs every element of daily life. The width of a hat brim, the style of a buggy, the color of a dress. What most people on the outside do not understand is that the Ordnung does not stop at the bedroom door. It walks straight through it. It was never written down. You cannot point to a page. You cannot show a child a paragraph and say, "Here, this is the rule," because it does not live in paragraphs. It lives in what the bishop preaches and what the deacon enforces and what the older women say in low voices to the younger ones while their hands are busy with some task. It lives in what is not said, in the shape of the silence around certain subjects. And the subject it was most silent about was this: a wife's body belongs to the marriage belongs to God, and God's position, as transmitted through every sermon I had ever sat through on a hard wooden bench, was that a wife submits, a wife yields. A wife does not place her own comfort above the covenant she made. Her body's natural rhythms, the bleeding days, the days of cramping and heaviness, and the particular exhaustion that comes with them, those days were not considered a pause in that covenant. They were considered irrelevant to it. I want you to understand the specific texture of that, because it is very easy to hear a general statement and let it stay general. In my community, the monthly cycle was managed in silence. You did not discuss it with your husband beyond bare necessity. You moved through those days as invisibly as you could, because drawing attention to the body's rhythms was itself considered a kind of immodesty. The result of all that silence was that every woman was navigating her body alone inside a marriage with no framework that gave her the right to ask for anything. There was no elder who had said to the young women, "This is a time to be gentle with yourself." There was no theology of rest. There was only the expectation, and the expectation did not pause. There was a woman in my district I will call Esther. She lived 2 farms from us, married the same season I did. We became close the way Amish women become close, which is to say sideways. Voices low, hands occupied, the real conversation happening in the margins of approved tasks. Shelling beans, hanging wash, pressing cider. Esther told me one afternoon that she had learned not to tell her husband when her time came. She had learned to carry those days invisibly, because the one time she had mentioned it plainly, the one time she had hoped for a few quiet nights, he told her that the needs of her body were not his concern, that her duty as a wife did not pause for inconvenience. She said this to me without anger. That was the thing that lodged in me like a splinter, the absence of anger. She had already absorbed the lesson so completely that it no longer produced anything in her. It had become simply the shape of her life, the walls of the room she lived in. I recognized it because I was standing in the same room. My husband was not a violent man. I want to be precise about that because the word punishment is going to appear in this story, and I know what people imagine when they hear it. He never raised his hand. He never raised his voice beyond what was necessary to be firm. What he did was colder and quieter and in some ways harder to name. The first time I held my ground, the first time I said no and kept saying no through the hours that followed, the warmth left. Not all at once. Not in a way I could have pointed to from the outside and called cruelty. It left the way a lamp dims when you turn it down notch by notch. The small daily kindnesses vanished, the hand on the shoulder when passing, the word about something noticed in the field, the acknowledgement that I was a person and not only a function. He ate at the table. He conducted the business of the farm. He assigned tasks and acknowledged completed work. But there was no texture to it, no softness. And in a life as contained as mine was, where the household is the center of everything, and the husband is the center of the household, and there is nowhere else to go, that withdrawal is not a small thing. It is the withdrawal of the world. The children felt it too. Not because he was unkind to them. He was not. But children live in atmosphere the way fish live in water. A cold house is a cold house regardless of what the coldness is named. And eventually, I would come back to him. Because the cost of holding the boundary was more than I had the resources to pay. And when I came back, there was no conversation, no acknowledgement, no reckoning, only the return to normal, which meant the return to the expectation. This happened not once, but across 4 years in cycles I eventually understood as precisely as the body rhythms that triggered them. Yield, hold, cost, break, return, yield again. What I did not have was language. I did not know the words for what was happening to me. I had no framework outside the Ordnung, and the Ordnung said nothing, and the silence said everything, and everything it said pushed in the same direction. Then I left. At 26, I left. The shunning was immediate and complete. My mother did not come to the door when I knocked. My sister, who I had shared a bed with until the morning of my wedding, sent my letter back unopened. A woman who had stood beside me at my own ceremony walked past me in a parking lot 3 months after I left and looked through me like I was made of air. That is the other punishment, not the punishment inside the marriage, the punishment for leaving it. I found a therapist in a city I had never heard of when I was a girl. She gave me words I had never been given: coercion, bodily autonomy, marital duty doctrine, intimate partner pressure. She asked me once what single sentence I would have needed to hear before my wedding day. I sat with that question for a long time. The sentence was this: your body's experience is not a footnote to your marriage. It is not a consideration to be weighed against your husband's needs and found less important. It is simply real. It is yours. You are allowed to say so. No one said that sentence to me. The church had no room for it. The Ordnung had no room for it. I spent the best years of my early adulthood learning to override the evidence of my own body, because every structure I lived inside told me my body's testimony was not admissible. I am saying that sentence now because somewhere there is a woman lying in the dark tonight already calculating the cost of saying no. I want her to know the cost is real. The system is real. There is a name for it. And there is also a door. I am the proof of the door. The theology that shaped my husband was not something he invented. He inherited it. He genuinely believed it. He was enacting what he understood faithful husbands to do. And that is the most disorienting part to reckon with in all of this. The harm was consistent. The harm was real. The harm shaped my body's understanding of itself for years after I walked away. And the man who caused it was, by the standards of everything he had ever been taught, a good man. That is what the system does. It does not require bad men. It only requires silence and inheritance and the weight of generations of compliance pressing down on the same spot. I am telling this story because you deserve to know that endurance is not love. Silence is not virtue. A body that bleeds every month is not failing in its duty. It is doing exactly what it was made to do. And the person who taught you to apologize for that, whether through silence or theology or through the specific cold pressure of a house gone dark, that person was wrong. I am saying that plainly so it cannot be misheard. Wrong. If this story opens something in you, leave me a comment. Tell me what stayed with you. Tell me if you recognize any part of this. I read every single one. The version of this story that this platform will not allow is in the first comment of this video. Choose your freedoms wisely. They might just save your life.